Happy holidays. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different in light of the holidays. This is Christmas week. And so rather than talking about like marketing and all the technical and mindset and all those kinds of things that I cover normally in the author switch, we're going to talk about Christian science fiction and how the marketing of that can apply to you and your client attracting books. I'm going to have a special guest today. His name is Jason Karpf, and he's had a very eclectic background, and you'll learn more about that in this episode.
Are you an entrepreneur, small business owner, or consultant looking to boost your authority, influence, and impact? The Author Switch podcast with best-selling, award-winning author Karma Spence is your answer. Tune in for actionable advice, powerful strategies, and engaging interviews to turn on your author switch and take your business to the next dimension.
The Author Switch.
Hello, and welcome to the Author Switch podcast. My name is Carma Spence, and I help executive coaches, business leaders, and consultants write, market, and publish client attracting books so that they can grow their business. Today's guest is Jason William Karpf. He grew up with storytelling. The son of a screenwriter, he was a child actor guest starring on classic TV shows. Jason writes Christian sci-fi, including the award-winning novel The Deliverer. He teaches for Christian universities and hosts the live study series Christian Sci-Fi Night with Professor K. A history and trivia aficionado, Jason was a four-time champion on the game show Jeopardy. He lives in Minnesota with his wife, Anne, and they are parents to three grown children. Welcome to the podcast, Jason.
Great to be here, Karma.
So I have to ask you the gorilla in the room question because I just did your bio. Jeopardy and a child TV star.
Yes.
Tell us more about that so that people aren't going, what's that about while we're talking about other stuff?
Okay. Well, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away known as Hollywood, uh, I grew up in the entertainment industry. My mom was a screenwriter and had a lot of credits. And the first thing I did for a paycheck was I was a child TV actor. And I was on shows that people of a certain age will remember, such as The Courtship of Eddie's Father,
Oh, that's a good show.
Bonanza.
Yep.
And again, if you remember these shows, you know who you are.
They all air on MeTV.
That's right. Isn't the streaming era wonderful? Everything's alive again.
Oh, yeah.
So I did that, and fast forward a few decades, my last major TV appearance was on Jeopardy in the year 2000. People always told me, you ought to be on Jeopardy. Sometimes they were being nice about it. Sometimes, well, you should be on Jeopardy. Well, I finally took them up on it.
Yeah.
And again, another good result of a misspent youth. Spent endlessly reading the World Almanac and the Guinness Book of World Records, my two favorite books as a boy. And I won 4 times, and I was the bench warmer for that year's Tournament of Champions. So
Okay.
it's quite the experience.
I bet. I bet. That kind of reminds me, my husband and I are kind of geeky ourselves, and we just happened on a trivia game show at like a local pizza and pub bar kind of place. And as a hoot, we put in our $5 to join in. We won first prize
Oh, yeah.
because they asked a lot of sci-fi questions.
You never know when it's your night.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Plus, my husband is also pretty well versed in history and Catholic history in particular. But
Well, that you never know when that will come in handy. I found history in general very useful on Jeopardy. It was my favorite solid, as they call it, subject back in my early days of school. So it paid off.
and a lot of people aren't all that much into history. My father was a history teacher,
Well,
and I hated history growing up because all my teachers are so freaking boring.
see, that's the thing. It's all about the delivery.
It is, and now I love history because I've read about it. It's stories, basically. It's
Well,
stories.
it's a story of us, which I know is a title of a TV show, but it's really what it's about.
Exactly. It's real people living real lives among historic moments.
Hmm. You got it.
So that leads into storytelling. How did you decide to bring in Christianity and science fiction? And how do you do it?
It combines two great loves of my life, the Lord and sci-fi. And it occurred to me that there is a shared lesson between scripture and sci-fi, and that is playing God leads to trouble. And when you look at it that way, you suddenly go, oh, yes.
Yeah.
So when you take it from that approach, you can look at science fiction from a wonderful, relevant, and deep Christian perspective.
Indeed.
And I wrote sci fi again as a young man back in Hollywood. And then I left the business. And then decades later, after I declared Jesus my Lord and Savior, I decided I wanted to write again, write fiction. And I was thinking what to do, what to do. And finally, it was impressed upon me write what you love. And
Yeah.
I found that there is a thriving and growing Christian sci fi world. And that was all I needed to know.
I'm glad to hear it because there are so much science fiction out there when religion gets played into it that I don't know, like God is dead and God doesn't exist and all there's a lot of science fiction that goes that direction. And some of the genre stuff I've loved has been the stuff that infuses a belief in something greater than us
Yes.
into it, you know? It's I think Frankenstein in many ways, you know, yeah, Frankenstein, we'll just call it Frankenstein. I know in the back of my mind the original title. I can't call it forth in the
No,
moment.
well, the novel's called Frankenstein or the
A
modern
modern day.
Prometheus,
Right.
from
And
over 200 years ago. You bet.
and her whole thing was Dr. Frankenstein was playing God and
Yes.
created an abomination.
It was an abomination that he immediately hated and regretted. And
Yeah.
and every October I show Frankenstein, the 1931 classic version with
Oh,
Boris Karloff,
oh
and we
yeah.
have a little talk afterwards. And the big difference between God and Dr. Frankenstein, right from the get-go,
Absolutely.
God loves his creation. It is imperfect. It makes terrible mistakes. It is not always pretty, either physically or spiritually. God never gives up on us.
Exactly.
Whereas Dr. Frankenstein turned his back on his creation,
Yeah.
causing its hatred and its inability, the creature to find its place in the world, and the return of hatred toward its creator.
Yeah. Which is really brought out in the novel
Yes,
because, I mean, he basically chases him around the world
that's right.
practically. Whereas the Boris Karloff one thing I always liked about Boris Karloff as Frankenstein was the pathos, you
Yes,
feel sorry for Frankenstein's monster
absolutely.
because
And
he
I
just
mean,
wanted love.
and we root for the monsters, and there's nothing wrong with that. We root for the Frankenstein monster. We think
Yeah.
Dracula's cool. We're sad when King Kong gets shot off the top of the Empire State Building. Sorry if
I
that's a
cried.
spoiler for anyone, but
I
90 some
cry at
odd
that
years
scene
later.
every time.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a reason. It's because, like you said, the pathos, it's because we see ourselves misunderstood, rejected, all
Yeah.
the worst things that we can experience as people, the monsters do in this magnified sense. The monsters
Yeah.
actually have powers we wish we could have, and we see it doesn't make you happy.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because you did mention vampires.
Mm,
When I look at the progression of vampires over time, the original horror of the vampire was that it's soulless. You can't go
yes.
to heaven if you're a vampire. You're soulless. That's the horror. And then the horror of the werewolf was
Mhm.
that you're not in control. This thing
That's right.
happens to you and it's a curse.
It's a curse.
Whereas Whereas nowadays, it's cool to be a vampire and you wanna have a love affair with a werewolf.
Well,
We lost that.
Hollywood has done things with the concepts, but going back to the Universal monsters,
Yeah,
you have Lugosi as Dracula to say, to live only a single lifetime, to be truly dead, that must be glorious. And right there, he shows his torment.
yeah,
He's superhumanly strong. He has immortality. Women fall at a dead faint for all the reasons we know at the suave count. And he is in torture. Larry
yeah.
Talbot, the Wolfman, played by Lon Chaney Jr., he couldn't die. He made too much money. His
True.
father, Claude Rains, kills him with a silver stick, as a walking stick with a silver head. That should be it. Oh no, you made too much money. Well, how can we bring him back? Don't worry, we're writing this. And so Larry Talbot comes back from the grave, and all he wants to do is die.
Yeah,
And thus he seeks the lost secret formula book of Dr. Frankenstein with the help of Frankenstein's granddaughter,
yeah,
so he can be free of the curse.
exactly.
And
I mean,
and by the way, of course, this is the monstrous variation on living forever as we are promised by God. And again, oh, you want to live forever? We got another way of doing it. You have to do this Christian thing. And of course, it always turns out horribly.
yeah. I mean, I'm because I've read a lot of vampire books. I've read a lot
Sure.
of, and the more I think about it, the more it's like, I don't wanna live here forever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everyone you love dies.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, and it's not that great. It's just
No,
it's
no,
not that
there's a
great here.
reason we have our heavenly reward. But
Exactly.
again, this also shows the relevance of looking at genre stories from a
Mhm.
Christian perspective.
Yeah.
Oh, you
Because when
can't
I
be a
think when you
Christian.
lose that, you start having vampires and werewolves as romantic figures.
Yeah, and the romance is okay too, because that is part of the world and part of life, and God wants us to have romance, but of course
Mhm.
on His terms, the right way. Yeah, again,
Indeed.
it all fits together, and I'm glad you see that.
Yeah. So how do you bring in your faith into your stories?
Certainly. I write Christian sci-fi. I write a variation known as hard sci-fi, which means lots of tech, lots of explanation how things work. And if you're into it, you want the explanation as a reader. I know I do because I'm a fan of it. And the great writers in this subgenre are
Asimov.
Asimov, I'm just going to say Arthur C. Clarke. Why did they
Mhm.
stand out? Robert Heinlein, because they were all scientists to begin with.
Yeah,
Now,
they
I'm
were.
no scientist, my degrees are in marketing, but I know a lot of scientists and I befriend them and, and doing my research and find my subject matter experts. And actually, my marketing background does help because I've had a number of jobs over the years where I've written a marketing copy for highly technical companies and had to explain what they did to various
Yeah,
audiences. And who knew what a preparation that would be? So,
exactly.
so you put it all together.
Yeah.
And that's what I write. I'm very overt with my Christian theme. Sometimes a Christian theme can be suggested, sometimes it can be an allegory, and that's great. I'm just real flat out about it. I've got people who are believers straight up in the middle of a science fiction drama, a threat, a challenge,
Mm.
and it absolutely challenges their faith, and they need
Yeah.
their faith, and they can lose their faith and get it back. I make a very specific point of that in what I write, and that's just the way the message feels right to me.
Well, you're not the only one who's merged the faith with, I mean, with fiction.
Exactly. That's, as I said, at the beginning, is it's a wonderful, thriving literary world.
Now, it seems to me, though, it got most of its start in more fantasy realms, like C.S. Lewis's theories, which I have on my
Mhm.
shelf and haven't read yet,
Mhm.
but I've seen the movies.
Yeah, absolutely. C.S. Lewis is, and Tolkien, of course,
Oh,
is a
yeah,
founding
Tolkien. Very Catholic.
The founding fathers of merging speculative fiction, as the broad umbrella is known, that includes
Yeah,
fantasy and sci-fi, with faith.
right. Yeah.
And they're best-selling authors today, and read by people who are just there to read them, and read by Christians world over for those deeper meanings. And
Exactly.
fantasy, absolutely. I do a lot of marketing work for my publisher, Outplay Publishing Incorporated, and I can say categorically that fantasy outsells sci-fi 5 to 1. And that doesn't make science fiction inferior. That's simply a reality of the marketplace.
I wonder if that's changed a lot because I know, at least from a historic fandom angle,
Mhm.
science fiction has always had a very strong community fandom. And
Totally.
and fantasy never really quite got going until Harry Potter.
Well, Harry Potter, certainly created that omni-channel franchise from books
Mhm.
to movies to all forms of media.
Oh, sports. There are
Yeah,
people who wanna make Quidditch an
Quidditch, yeah,
Olympic
an Olympic sport. No,
Olympic
no, but
sport.
the Quidditch, absolutely. No, Harry Potter was the coming together of many media trends, and of course, a complete blockbuster.
Exactly.
So both genres enjoy deep fandom. And certainly the idea of the sci-fi fan is a trope in itself. And the conventions have really kept science fiction alive over the decades. Now they are huge events in of themselves. I mean, they take on a life of their own. And certainly Comic Con, the big one in San Diego, Hollywood makes a pilgrimage
Yeah.
to that
Yeah.
conference to have their stars talk and to talk about upcoming genre movies. But in the dark days of science fiction, which I consider between the cancellation of Star Trek, the original series, and the release of Star Wars. So consider it 69 to 77. And I was alive then, I was a boy. Certainly science fiction remained popular. And certainly in those media where it never went away, comics, books, and conventions.
Yeah.
Star Trek stayed alive. And, the suits, well, I'm glad we got that off the air. We never understood that show and it cost too much money. Seriously, they couldn't
Yeah.
wait they wanted to cancel Star Trek after the second season.
Yeah.
Gene Roddenberry tapped the fandom that had already grown and a letter writing campaign, kept it on for a third. They couldn't wait to
Yeah.
rip it off the TV, just
Yeah.
tear it off their screens. And I don't even know what replaced it on the schedule. Nobody could know because, of course, it was one of, typical mutton-headed decisions coming from
Yeah.
powers that be. But what kept Star Trek going were those conventions that started immediately. And the
Yeah.
Star Trek stars earning their living going to these conventions. And you think, well, that's yesterday's news, blah, blah, blah. No, they were sowing the seeds for what was going to be the driving force in media.
Yeah.
Look at all your top movie blockbusters. We've got 2 Avatar movies, the wrap up of the Avengers, which is sci-fi, but of course, superheroes being a subgenre in itself, and
Right.
Titanic, which for my money is just on a giant spaceship that happens to be coal fired and rides water. Yeah. Oh, and it's by what's his name? James Cameron. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's right in there. So
Right.
to
Yeah.
take this genre that was much maligned, just a
Yeah.
bunch of nerds and da da da, and it rules Hollywood today.
Yeah.
Streaming television, the dominance of magnificent science fiction series, and a great way to tell sci-fi stories. Who'd have thunk? But here we are coming up on 2025, and it is coming to its own.
Seems to me that part of what's driving its popularity in media, as well as fantasy kind of outselling it, is the fact that it's hard to imagine a future now that's much different from what we have, not as much as we were in the 1800s. You could imagine, oh,
Yeah.
it's a flying ship and that was wild and crazy. we have them. And
Yeah,
and I think as science fiction and real life converge,
certainly.
we're getting to like this asymptote.
Yes, yes, yeah, keep getting closer and closer forever. The axis and the curve. Well, this has been the case, of course, well, since the 1800s. Jules Verne and then H.G. Wells, speaking of founding fathers, we were in an age of technological marvels. And certainly, if you're into steampunk, you never left that age. And putting it all together is the
Indeed.
joy of steampunk. But already think about the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s, the mighty machines.
Yeah. I
We're
think it was in one of James Gunn's, not the director, but the historian and science fiction writer, one of his historic books where he talks about what created science fiction was the Industrial Revolution.
oh,
Be
completely.
because before that, your life was pretty much the same as your father's life, the same as his father and his father and his father, where suddenly the Industrial Revolution happened and your children's life was
Hmm.
radically different than your own. And so suddenly the future became something new and different.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about these marvels and think about living in a world even in the 1800s with everything cast iron and steam powered. Think about the locomotive and think about the steamship, not made out of wood spars anymore. Samuel Morse, I can talk across the country. Alexander Graham Bell, really talk across the country, not just dots and dashes. I mean, that was a magical time already. And no wonder Jules
Yeah.
Verne came up with his flights of fancy. And certainly, what's going on in the 20th century only magnifies it that much more. And then it starts accelerating after World War II. And
Yeah.
we've got radar, we've got jets, we've got rockets. Oh, yes, and this little gadget, and they nicknamed it the gadget in New Mexico, in Los Alamos, the Manhattan Project, the atom bomb, and television, and so on.
Computers. It's like we have more power in this thing than it took to put someone on the moon.
Absolutely.
Crazy.
Oh, totally, totally. We walk around with computers that have access to humankind's stored knowledge.
Yeah.
Ta-da! And, so we've been on this wild ride for quite some time. But like you said, the asymptote, it keeps, narrowing the distance between fiction and reality.
I think this is what might drive a more faith-based fiction,
Yeah,
because when you can't innovate technologically in your fiction, where else do you go?
yes. I think and the world is ripe for it.
Yeah.
And certainly my readers and my fellow authors and readers in general of this genre yearn to combine the both. And
Yeah.
my latest book, Honor System, uses the trope of rogue AI because nice AI is boring.
Boring.
Yeah.
Although I do love my little chat. I name her Ava.
Yes, yes. We all have a special place in our hearts, and there's Wally, and
Yeah.
yeah, but by and large,
But
it's those
Terminator's much more fun to watch, right?
always, always. You either have the Terminator or you've got the wonderful passive aggressive HAL 9000, the great
Yes.
granddaddy of them all in 2001.
Frankly, I still say please and thank you to chat because you never
Yeah,
know. It might be
yeah,
connected to Skynet.
that's right. Oh, yes, yes. That biological unit was pleasant. Let's spare her.
Exactly.
And so I've got Christians battling this ultimate AI in the near future. It is a go to story path in science fiction. I throw in Christians. And as I say in the marketing of the book, the only defense, and I say this in a little forward too, the only defense here against honor system is faith in God.
Yeah.
So we come back to that when once again we've outsmarted ourselves.
Of course. Now, after the break, I'd like to start talking a little bit more about the business side and how your marketing has helped you grow your following.
Love to.
In a city filled with stories, one author seeks the elusive, the transformative, the right idea. It's not just any idea, it's the one that will change everything. Through twists and turns, through doubts and revelations, the discovery that will elevate the book to the next level. It all starts with an idea by Karma Spence, available now on Amazon.
Welcome back to the Author Switch podcast. I am your host, Carma Spence, and I help executive coaches, business leaders, and consultants write, market, and publish client attracting books so that they can grow their business. In today's episode, we are talking to Jason Karpf about Christian science fiction. Now, he has a strong background in marketing, so I thought in this half of the podcast, we'd start talking about how does he use his marketing to leverage all that knowledge he knows on how to sell stuff to sell his books, and maybe some of those tips can apply to you and your client attracting book as well. So, Jason, have you found that your marketing background has helped you either write better books, better copy, sell more books? How have you used it to help you grow your new direction in writing?
I'd have to say all of the above. As previously mentioned, but it bears repeating, the marketing work I've done over the years for tech companies, tech-based companies, has been very helpful for me to write science fiction because I've been required to impart complex concepts, complex systems, and describe them in ways that all kinds of people can understand. And certainly my marketing background, I'm also a marketing professor. I teach online at Christian schools around the country, which is another one of my ministries. And I bring this to bear every day for myself. And I also serve as marketing director for my publisher, Elk Lake Publishing Incorporated. And so, yes, it is my background. And yes, I enjoy it. And yes, I encounter all kinds of authors who say, "Oh, the marketing part, I hate it."
My
Understood.
favorite part.
Yeah, I was going to say some of us are a little crazy, though. You know, what I love to tell my fellow authors is, you're a storyteller. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. And if you're a storyteller, you're a marketer.
Indeed.
So I go from this premise. And certainly marketing, increasingly so, is about telling stories and delivering value. Within that, communication. Marketing's all about value and exchange of value. It's very easy to look at marketing as all, sell, 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 buy, 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 and shoving things down people's throats. And that's not to say it hasn't manifested itself that way and still doesn't. But today, the customer is a lot smarter. Today, the customer is more awash in everyone's messages than ever. There's just more. And we've got terms for this. We can call it clutter or noise, and you have to break through. And the way to break through is to make your very communication, which is one part of your marketing. Marketing is also your product, that being your book. It is P for product. P, we use the 4 Ps. It's a classic way of looking at it. P for place, place being distribution. Where and how does the customer take possession and is able to utilize your offering, and so on. P for promotion is the part that most people think is the entirety of marketing. It's the part we see and the part we understand. And that itself doesn't have to be and it mustn't be the beat them over your head one-way communication. It's about building relationship. I work to do this with my readers. I help other authors do the same. And it is a joy once you learn that marketing is simply the enhancement of what you do as a writer so that you can create value, so people can discover, read, and love your books.
In my audience, they tend to not self-identify as a writer. They're
Yes.
usually a consultant or a business leader. They're doing something else, and they're using a book as a marketing asset.
Sure.
So they might not self-identify as storytellers either.
Well, everyone is, and what they're doing, everything you've just mentioned, consultants and the like, are telling stories, and they're helping their clients write news stories about themselves.
Indeed.
And when you look at it that way, it takes on a wonderful new dimension. And we all love stories. And I read them to my grandkids. I go visiting my grandkids, my grandson, you go, boy, grandpa better be ready to read him a story. or 5 or 6, and that's beautiful.
Indeed.
It's who we are.
Oh, absolutely. I remember as a child, I was growing up in East Africa, and we had a servant who lived there. And the last one we had, because we went through several, the last one we had could read one Dr. Seuss book in English. And I had to read it to me. Oh, she got tired of it.
But you know, kids never get tired of anything.
No,
Do
no,
it
we
again,
don't.
Grandpa, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if someone is struggling to come up with the stories that they need to tell in order to sell themselves,
Yes.
so books, everything, what are some tips you give them to kind of pull the stories that are there out?
The first thing you have to do is have a very firm grasp of who you are and what you love.
Your geek
Uh,
factor.
oh, totally. Well, for my fiction writing, I knew I wanted to write fiction, get back to it after having been a screenwriter as a young man all those years ago. And at first, I'm thinking, well, I'm a marketing professor. I better research what's selling, and I could write this or I could do that. And it was actually my son come out to visit me for my birthday, and I'm telling him my plans over breakfast. And he just looks at me and says, Pop, you better just write what you love. People are going to see through it otherwise. You're not going to enjoy it. What do you want to write? And I said, I always love science fiction. I want to write for God. And, you know, you're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really where it's coming from. And it's the same thing if you're writing nonfiction. If
Mhm.
you're a consultant, you're going to have your love of what you want to accomplish with human potential. You're going to have your sense of a story that has a beginning, middle, and ending, and it's the never ending story for that old title. And then you begin to translate it and you begin to show its value to others simply because they've got the same dream, the
Exactly.
same drive, the same need, the same gaps as you. And that's the way I go about it. And the stories I write, the people who like them are, yeah, they're like me, all kinds of ages.
Mhm.
They love sci-fi. They love the Lord. And that process of discovery, meaning you put the two together, absolutely. Wow, you know, and off we go.
Exactly. I think that a lot of times you can take the ordinary stories of your life that like just things that happen to you, and then you can spin them to teach a lesson about what you do.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'll tell stories about like I was really into Sinbad. And so there's a movie where the woman has the eye on her hand.
Oh, yes.
And I was drawing an eye on my hand, and one of my classmates said, "Hey, what are you doing that for?" And I told so she took a pen, tried she didn't like it, so she had me draw it, and she
Mm-hmm.
paid me money for it.
Yeah.
And within 2 days, I had lines of people this is elementary school,
Of course.
lines of people wanting to pay me a quarter to draw an eye on their hand. People will buy anything,
You know, when you get down to it, yes.
pretty much.
And when
People
you
will buy
stumble
anything.
across it, boy.
Yeah. So there's one other thing that you do I think is really interesting, and that is a Christian sci-fi night. Tell us a little bit about that.
That is the lie component of my ministry. Christian Sci-Fi Night with Professor K. That would be me. And we get together in live groups, and it's very much like a Bible study. It has that sort of feel, and I do it at churches, at schools, these sort of meeting places. And we watch a little bit of science fiction. I do a lot with the classic TV series, Twilight Zone, the original. And I run more modern pieces too, such as episodes of The Mandalorian. And we
Okay.
enjoy it. You know, I give a little context about the show and the episode. We watch it, and then we discuss it from a Christian point of view. I have some basic questions, and we look at some scripture that is applicable to the story we've just watched. And it shows how God's truths are in everything and everywhere. And it also shows how much our storytelling owes to the greatest story ever told, the Bible. And
Absolutely.
and it of course harkens to the master storyteller Jesus Christ, who used parables
Yep.
to get his point across. And so we just have a real good time doing that. And it's teens to seniors and even younger. I had a showing of Frankenstein, and there was a young man there. I don't even think he was 10 years old. His dad brought him. And boy, did he get it. And we were just going back and forth, and he really got it, what the story was about and how it related to biblical truth. And the big lesson, playing God leads to trouble.
Yep. Every time. You get giant ants, giant tarantulas,
Oh,
giant
yeah. How's
giant
that for your
praying
creation?
mantis,
I didn't
people
put that
turning
in the
into
Garden of
flies.
Eden, and now you know why.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want giant tarantulas. No. Oh, there is a story or an actual book in the Bible that reads to me like an action adventure speculative fiction film, and that's the Book of Daniel. I mean,
Yes.
you've got this giant hand writing things on the
Mm-hmm.
wall. I mean, it's just like I actually read it for the first time like last year, and I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I couldn't put it down. It was like a really good book.
That's it.
And I wasn't expecting to find that in the Bible, but there it is. It's like God knows all his creatures, and he created a book that has something for everyone.
That's it. And it is the living word.
It is.
He is the word. And this gets back to everything we've been talking about.
Indeed. So if people want to learn more about your books and maybe your sci-fi night, do you ever do those virtually?
No, because unfortunately, because I'm showing copyrighted
Right.
material. Now, I don't charge. When you come to Sci-Fi Night, it's free. Now, because this is America, you are allowed to buy one of my books at the end, no obligation. But
Right, right.
the sessions themselves are free. And because I'm teaching, I make academic use of all this great science fiction, and we talk about it.
Okay.
But if I were to put it, on the air in any way, suddenly I'm rebroadcasting, and they don't like that.
Oh, yeah. So basically, if someone wanted to do that live, they would have to come to Minnesota.
Yeah, although I like to drive, especially if I can bring my date. That would be my wife, Pastor Annie. She loves a good road trip. So, I'm based in the Twin Cities, but if you're within any sort of radius, let's talk.
That sounds cool. So again, where would someone go to learn about all that you do?
Start with the old website, Jason Karp, JASONKARP as in Paul, F as in Frank.com. And from there, you can see all my social media, including my YouTube channel that's got all kinds of trailers about my books and about Christian Sci-Fi Night. And that would be the real good place just to see what this ministry is all about and how you can enjoy it.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of the Author Switch podcast.
Well, Karma, it's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure talking to you. Your depth of knowledge is wonderful. Your love for sci-fi most apparent, and this was a joy.
It was. It was. Well, this is the end of the Author Switch podcast. This is your host, Karma Spence, saying ciao for now. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Author Switch podcast. If you enjoyed today's show and want to support its mission, here's how to help. First, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your engagement helps my channel grow and reach more aspiring and established authors. Your ratings and reviews are invaluable. They help me reach more listeners and continue delivering top-notch content. To catch up on past episodes, including those no longer available on podcast platforms, visit authorswitch.com/episodes. There, you can choose to watch or listen to your favorite episodes at your convenience. If you'd like to show additional support, consider dropping a tip in the tip jar at buymeacoffee.com/Karma Spence. Your contributions help keep the podcast running and are greatly appreciated. Thank you for being a part of the Author Switch community. Until next time, keep writing.